Trevor Trodd, so I'm the AVP of Sales for Collibra here in Canada, based in Toronto. I've been with Collibra for over 5 years, and I've had the privilege to work with many Canadian companies coast to coast on the universal value of data, helping companies drive business outcomes, achieve adoption for their metadata management, data catalog, data governance, data intelligence, and data quality projects and programs. So very excited to be here today on this panel to discuss how our companies like we have here today have harnessed the power of data to make us more informed, drive better business decisions, and unite us in a way that only data can. So it is my pleasure to welcome to the panel 3 great data leaders and my fellow panelists. So by way of introduction, starting first with Tanja Glisin, who is the Data Governance Platform and Metadata Repository Strategy Manager within the Chief Technology Office at TELUS. Next is Steve Hoskin, who is the Vice President of Data Enablement and Architecture within the Data Office at Scotiabank. And last but certainly not least, Ben Salvador-Watts, who's the Director of Data Platforms at Moneris. So welcome to all 3 of you. So glad to have you here. Welcome also to our audience. I, for one, am looking forward to the takeaways and the lessons learned from these data leaders. So I'll stop sharing there. And just, before we begin, just to give a bit of context to our audience about the session today, the panelists here are linked to me as customers of Collibra for the past few years. It's been a personal pleasure to have been involved in the start of each of their respective data and metadata journeys. I also happen to be a customer of each of their respective companies, these great Canadian companies. So I have banking products from Scotiabank, which is Canada's most international bank. I have mobile phone subscriptions with TELUS, who are certainly making the future friendly. And for Moneris, who's Canada's largest fintech company focused on payment processing, every time I make a credit card purchase at a point of sale system run by Moneris, I go wherever I grow. And certainly I haven't been doing as much shopping as I would have liked in the past year due to COVID, a bit more online, I suppose, which Moneris also supports. So my interest today will be in multiple facets of this discussion. So looking forward to it. Thanks very much for joining. And I think that's a great place to get started today is for each of the panelists to really talk about the programs that you're running, to give the audience the background to how you got started and to where you are now. So with that, maybe Steve, would you like to start us off?
Okay, sure. And thank you, Todd, Trevor, for the commercial break there. That was really nice. Really nice the way you tied that in. Yeah, so we have embarked on our data program a couple of years back, and one of the first things that we did was we kind of looked around and said, okay, what is the centerpiece of how we're going to execute on this data program? How are we going to tie together all the pieces? How are we going to find the connections across all the different disparate sources of data we have and start to understand our data better? We went through the long process from a bank point of view for the acquisition of Collibra. For our catalog, we call that the implementation of Collibra Universal Catalog, because we really feel that lots of different technical catalogs around the bank and data assets around the bank. We wanted something to tie everything together, and so that's why for us Collibra is Universal Catalog. But it's a long journey to actually implement something like that, a data program at the bank, and I'm focusing on the Collibra part, but also there's the whole data program identifying people who are owners of the data. And one of the things that we found in that evolution was you can't just assume that we're going to be able to find data stewards who are owning different parts of the data, like let's say customer or payments or cards or whatever else. Yes, you're going to try to identify those individuals, but the reality is the people dealing with the data are the consumers of the data, the custodians of the data, And those people are a lot closer. And so one of the things that we've kind of learned over time is that you have to start smaller and kind of graduate to where you're actually doing proper data management with data stewards and business people. We do want to get there, and we think that we have the right path for getting there, but it's a long journey. And I'll stop there and give the others a chance to weigh in as well.
Thanks, Steve. Ben, do you want to go next?
Yeah, I'm happy to, and thanks, Trevor, also for the warm welcome. We talked about takeaways earlier, and I think if there's one takeaway that I can start with, it's to connect with the Collibra group and Trevor and learn a little bit, because the team's been around now in data governance in kind of a leadership position for a little while, and they have a lot to share, even just on how to get started and how to build a practice. So if that's what you're here to learn about today, I would strongly consider talking to the folks at Collibra. But to talk a little bit about the program and kind of where it stands today, I think if I can kind of highlight one thing, it's almost becoming impossible to keep up. There is just an enormous, and people say this, there's you've always hear the stat about the growth of data, so I'm not going to go there, but it is becoming very hard to keep up with stewards and what they're doing in their specific domains. And so what I like to kind of like think about as an analogy is, I'm a big cyclist, and it's a team sport, right? So when you're cycling with a group, you're riding as a team, and you need to always think about kind of where people are at in terms of their fitness and how they're keeping up with the group, and how you can get them to kind of work with the rest of the pack to kind of stay together as a team. And a lot about this is thinking about that team sport and that team kind of effort with the stewards, right? So whether it's they're implementing a new kind of add-on in Salesforce that's going to create a wealth of new data, how do you get them to like build in the governance into the program, bring that conversation back to the rest of the stewardship group to really enhance people's awareness? Because you can try to keep up by doing the catalog work and doing kind of all the things you should be doing in data governance as kind of like core principles, but the learning is still happening on the ground with people and with those connections. So thinking about how you create and really nurture those relationships across that group is really important. And I've found that a lot of the success I've experienced recently in the program is really around those events. So like the monthly event where you have people come in and talk about how they're working and what they're working on, and have the dialogue. And if you make those things exciting and you make those things that people like, the magnet events, people will come and they will learn. And maybe you won't write it all down, but that's okay, because it's sometimes that decision making that actually needs the information, and that's happening much faster now than it was before. So really think about kind of how you're nurturing the people, as well as kind of enabling them to be kind of more in the moment. And the catalog for sure is important, and you need to think about how you structure that. But really, I would lean into the relationships as much as possible. And one more thing before I pass it along, to build on something Steve said, which I thought was really good. There is a lot of co-ownership here. Like, to pass something on to like a data steward to allow them to like define something is often one of those things. It's like you send it off and it's not coming back the second you send it off. You're like, they're not going to be capable of doing it, right? And that's okay, right? And back to my silly cycling analogy, like there's always people in that group who are the strong riders and that everyone else is trying to hook on behind to. So make sure you're aware of that and send some of those people back to boost them through, right? And help to enable that stewardship, because it's not necessarily all going to happen just on its own, right? Like that's something you need to realize, and realize as soon as you can if you're in this position. And I think I can pass it now.
No, Ben, thank you. I can certainly, I like the analogy of the cycling. I think I would be probably back of the pack in a cycling contest, but yeah. Yes, Tanja, please, love to hear from you too.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for the warm introduction, Trevor. Yes, future is friendly. So, Stephen and Ben, they actually pretty much touched on very similar experiences we had. I just want to remind you that from our perspective, building this platform, metadata repository and data governance center, for us is coming from the CTO, from the Chief Technology Office, sponsorship and really great support there, top down, and that helped. That definitely helped. But when it comes to past to now, as Trevor, as you mentioned, I actually just want to go back into technology, back into what we did, and it really worked for us, right? So I would suggest to anyone who's embarking on something like this, please allow time and resources to do a proof of concept. Okay. And like if you between a couple of technologies, right, that's fair, right? But once you pick your technology and you're ready to commit, I still really like that's the highlight for me, what we've done, and it's been years now, right? And it still is paying dividends, literally, right? So what that helps with, it really helped us understand what we're getting into, understanding what kind of approach we will need to start thinking about, and also allow the core team to start learning, right? Technology is great. I find Collibra very intuitive. Our business that was on our journey with us, they really adopted how Collibra is servicing the business, not just technology units. So that is great. However, you still need to get used to it, and that POC really helped us understand, right? And over time, so we got the tool, that was all great, but then that experience, my personal and my core team POC experience, really led us to where we kind of realized we need to go. And we realized, because to Stephen's point, we definitely taking an enterprise approach. TELUS is huge and it's really complex. Telco is just one of our businesses, right? So we have health, we have agriculture, just to name a few, right? So you can start to imagine that complexity on top of the data management complexity as it is, right? So for us, it was really interesting, all that learning, right? And setting ourselves up led us to realize we actually have to base this on, some kind of a capability driven strategy. That's really, through that's really where we landed, and we realized it's vast, right? And we were so lucky. We had business units like early adopters before we installed the product. So that was so lucky. And they helped us. With how about this? How about that? Right. So that was our first, step in a strategy. So we knew we have to service the business glossary and data catalog capability to start with. That was, screaming at us, right? But that enterprise view, that enterprise approach was a must, right? With the large businesses like ours, you need to prepare for what you don't know, and you need to be able to extend. And Ben, maybe in some other forum, the designing of communities and everything else does require a lot of thought if you are into enterprise view, right? If you really want, here's this platform for every user, for every knowledge worker, right, at the company, then a little bit of thinking upfront and strategizing, it goes a long way.
Tanja, some great points from all the panelists there. I mean, the balance between introduction of new software versus like maturity, I think there was, maybe we'll come back to that, but I think, these are all good starting points for both your companies, and really, like for the next question is, where do you see this picture evolving? What are you going to do to continue the progress that you have? In short, where are you going next? Ben, do you want to start on this one?
Yeah, I'm happy to. I think I might zoom in a little bit to a couple of micro examples that I think are thematic for everyone here. So the first one is around like AI and ML governance. So it's it's becoming, obviously, and it has been, very important, but hasn't necessarily had as much, structural research out there that you can go in and tap into to figure out how to do this in an organization, right? It's maybe a little bit less mature than data governance. And so, understanding that is kind of key to knowing what to do with it, right? And so, and both Tanja and Steve talked about kind of the enterprise function that Collibra plays. So if you've gone ahead and you've built out kind of that way of operating, AI and ML governance actually sits really nicely in that same space, right? And I think, if this is something that's kind of bubbling up or becoming, a point of challenge, which it is in a lot of places, it's a great way to kind of handle it. And this is something that, we've kind of taken that path. We've said, look, like, we have great stewards, we have great software, we understand kind of, and that's where the gap is actually, it's the understanding. We have these practitioners of AI and ML, and they're now coming along to help, boost the education around the work that they're doing and how governance can, and really data governance can actually play a role in the work that's happening there, because ultimately AI and ML is creating data, right, that requires governance. And so it kind of is a bit of a cycle. And if you think about it, using the framework that exists, it becomes a lot easier to actually, put in place kind of at least a good starting point for how to, satisfy, your board or your kind of leadership team around how this is actually working in the organization. And then, of course, there's some layers that have to be put on top of that are specific to that kind of work. But I think it's something that has been really nice to see flow through as opposed to become this extra burden. And I think there's a big opportunity for, this to become something that's not only actually, and this is my kind of poke at you, Trevor, AI and ML has been great for a lot of things, and it can actually be great for data governance, I'm sure, too. And I can't wait to see what Collibra is going to do in terms of how they embed AI and ML into kind of the platform and make governance easy or easier for people using it. The other thing I'll just quickly touch on is, as we build out these catalogs that are great for the enterprise, something we've come across really recently is exposing that now to our customers for exchange. So, and we weren't ready for that, to be honest. It was a bit of a scramble. It was like, okay, so we have this tooling, we have now, public consumption or customer consumption of data through APIs. Can we also expose the Collibra, catalog to do that? And so we're working on that. We haven't done it yet. So we're using kind of a more rudimentary way of defining the data that's being consumed. But that's something where, think about that while you're building out your catalog. Would this be suitable to a customer? Can they read and understand your catalog? Does it make sense? Or is it only, in the context of your business that it makes sense? And you need to think about how you kind of work that through with your stewards, because it's always good practice to think about it like that. But when you actually put on your customer hat and say, hey, if I'm giving this to, my top customer, are they going to come back and ask questions, or are they going to think, wow, this is what I would expect to understand about the data on consumption? So those are two things I think have been interesting to go through this year or in the last maybe 18 months. And I think, something I would touch on.
Cool. Excellent. Yeah, AI models, governance, how we expose it to the outside world. Tanja, do you have a thoughts on kind of where you're going?
Sure. Something that Ben said really kind of decided which example I'm going to talk about. It's really great. Thanks. So we've from the very beginning, right? And everybody's urging you when you start a program like this, that you really have to kind of be use case driven, right? Use case driven. I don't know how many times I've heard that, right? But what that really means, right? So you start from peeling that onion to find out what that means for you, right? And yes, it's still good advice, right? But you really have to find for yourself, right? Like, you have to find out for yourself. Why is that important in this context where we're going, right? Because if you're building a platform like this for something today, you're already behind. You're wasting your time, and you're being busy. So from our perspective, we through the strategy that we were tossing around, our point was that how do you make the use case staying relevant, right? And mostly these use cases, I'll actually talk about the patterns. We found 3 patterns, but for us, it was really interesting, right? That yes, you have to stay relevant with use cases and real business units and real needs, but at the same time, you have to build it in such a way that you are forward looking, right? So, and you know, that's where, you know, it feels like, oh my gosh, I'm so lucky that we had X when the program Y came along. Actually, it's not luck, right? Like, you've been prepared, you've been thinking in advance. You were not solving the yesterday's problem, but you were anticipating the future, you know, needs. So believe it or not, that's exactly where the use case approach comes in for us, because we did not focus on just marketing, just customer excellence, or just, you know, IT needs, right? What we realized, there, you know, three major patterns in our case, right? So data operations use cases are, you know, can be in one big bucket, and they honestly are, they're hungry. They're hungry for ability to manage the knowledge, right? And get their efficiency and productivity up, right? They have all this knowledge. They have, you know, people come and leave. They leave with the knowledge, right? We start from the beginning. So that's one, you know, pattern of use cases we've seen. And then, of course, data analytics, like that's AI, that's machine learning, that's, you know, old-fashioned reporting or whatever it is, right? So knowledge workers of that kind, and they only need more data to be exposed to them, right? So they can fuel whatever they do in their day-to-day life, right? Fuel ideas, and, you know, make new products and new services. And then the third pattern that we found was really around data risk and accountability, right? So we're quite lucky at TELUS that we pay close attention to data security and data privacy, right? So that group, that pattern of use cases for us was always around, you know, increasing the overall knowledge about the data, right? And accountability. You know, that's where your stewards come in. So basically, that's really, you know, to pull it back, right? When you're thinking about use cases as patterns, you can actually service, and then you design and you build and you go forward with that in mind. You don't have to worry about this one little use case somewhere in here, right? So you're really preparing for any use case that you don't know of yet just to come to you.
Use case driven, love it, Tanja. Steve, your thoughts on where you're going next?
Hard to follow those. 100% agree with everything that Tanja and Ben said. So when we look at the use cases and how we want to expand our coverage, one of the ways in which we kind of scope that and prioritize that is we look for the connectedness. What we're finding is that the more connected our content, our metadata, I don't like to use the word metadata, but I don't know of another word. The more content, the more connected that metadata is, the more we can kind of operationalize the use of it. Because, and I think everybody knows that, right? A metadata catalog isn't a library. It's a thing that you use to get stuff done every single day. It's not something where you go to study, you know, like an academic subject. And I'm only saying that because I think in the past, and we have some legacy data catalogs around, and they're like some kind of vault, you know, ivory tower vault over here that nobody touches, and we pull it out when we want to do some kind of regulatory report. That's not the intention of, I think, a modern data catalog. We really need to focus on operationalizing it. So as we are looking for how to expand our meta model and the use cases that we can cover with the catalog, we're looking for those connections to make it more meaningful to how people operate on the data. And I'll go back to an example that Ben gave at the beginning around data ethics, data and AI ethics. So we saw that opportunity at Scotiabank. We have this program where we're trying to uncover unconscious bias and you know, biases in our model development and within our our machine learning, and we decided, we started embarking on a program where we were going to the analytics teams, asking them the questions, getting them to self-examine and, self-test. Is there something that you're doing here that might be causing unconscious biases around, how we grant loans or mortgages or whatever else, or credit card access. And so we could have just done those questionnaires and tied that together with the data initiatives that analytics teams were working on outside of the catalog. But we realized, hey, we already know about the initiatives they're working on. We already know about the underlying data sets, data elements, and even, business descriptions of that. We know about their feature tables. If we know all that already about these analytic models, why don't we then just augment that content with these Q&A about how you're planning on using the data and how you're building that model and what's your thinking behind it and how you're making sure that it is an unbiased model. And so we found that, I think like Tanja was saying, we were able to quickly pick up a future requirement because we already had that foundation and we already had all those connections to the rest of the content. And so that's how we're kind of taking what we have in the catalog and expanding on it.
Steve, Ben, Tanja, I think what I'm hearing is the more you're taking this view, we're going to build this connectedness across the company. We have to plan for all these use cases. We might even expose it outside the company. So which ties to the next question to support this progress. And I know as we prep for this panel, this was a topic I think near and dear to everyone. How do you build the teams to support that, especially given changing roles and what people do in the line of business versus data governance teams, stewardship teams? How do you support that, the build out of those teams? Tanja, do you want to start with that one?
Sure, no worries. So yeah, we started as a very, very small core team. As I recall, the POC, we literally started with 2 and with one resource, part-time resource for with our implementation partner. And we've grown to 12 now, almost 12. So basically, how did you get there, right? I will actually go back, right, to that strategy, right? So what is your strategy, right? You can't do everything at the same time, right? So basically, when we think in connection to how to get to a valuable resources, right? They're not in your company. Some of these jobs are net new. They didn't exist last year, right? So it's a struggle, but when you're looking at this, you really have to prepare. In our case, because we support the platform as well, right? You really kind of have to go around the circle of center of excellence type of a thing, right? So I would guess there's in our case we have at least 5 to 6 very distinct roles within our core team because of that, right? And because of our approach and our strategy that once we get the use cases, right, for the first wave, we go in waves, right? So then you do your technical integrations in that wave to service that layer or that group of use cases, right? Then so that's where you have your technical guys, like administration, platform needs to be scalable, you need to be up all the time, all those nice operational things that we care about as well, right? And then we layer of, so it's kind of when that wave is done, we go into onboarding. Now you start to onboard your content managers. They could be stewards, they could be IT professionals, they could be business unit professionals. We find that data knowledge is everywhere. You can call these people whatever you want, but to Ben's point, I think a couple of questions ago, you actually have to really dig and find who's that passionate person within organization, right? And sometimes just the passion and interest and data management can take you all the way, right, with a little bit of training. And sometimes you start with trained and experienced people, and then you go back to technology, right? So really it is like you have to watch everything, right? Like technology, process, right, and roles, right? Like you really have to do the parallel work for all three, right? And we hiring for all three.
There you go. Love it. Tanja, Steve?
Sure. Yeah, it's very complicated in a large organization how to staff this, right? So the approach we've taken is our data team is the core product owners. That's my team. We're not actually doing much of the implementation. We're more kind of product managing the implementation and making sure the right priorities, making sure we're talking to the right consumers of the data, getting adoption, that sort of thing. We work with our IT partners. It's hard to find a lot of mature Collibra skills in Canada. And I mean, they're out there, but they're not just going to, fall out of a tree the same way that, like, let's say, a BI reporting resource would. And so what we found is that our IT teams can staff up and kind of provide the lead and the architecture on that. We augment with vendors, with SIs, like Deloitte or TechM or other SIs. And then we have that other layer on top, which is Collibra coaching, that kind of helps vet the designs that we're coming up with. So collectively, between the product owners, our in-house IT teams, our SI partners, Collibra, we make sure that the solution, first fits the uses that we have for it, but that it's aligned with what other people out there are doing. It's really important to make sure, hey, and I've done this, with you, Trevor, where I'm saying, hey, we're thinking about doing this. What have you seen for your other customers out there? And we want to know that, right? Like, we want to know, oh, how did we do this implementation with cloud, let's say? Can your people look at that and kind of take us, provide a second set of eyes to validate that our approach is consistent and solid? So that's how we've tried to cobble together all the capabilities that we need to get this done.
Oh, I love it. Lots of moving parts for sure. Ben, your thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I'll just add a couple of things because I think, to be honest, Steve and Tanja covered most of it.
Yeah.
I think, to reiterate what they've said, like, and if it wasn't clear, this is a hot field with not enough people. So if you're considering it, get in it, because there is not enough folks out there who understand how to do this work. It's very rewarding, even though it has the title of governance in your job title. Like that can always be worked on. But trust me, this is a good place to be, and it's a big enabler for any organization that uses data seriously. I think, the only other thing I would add is just think, like, in terms of staffing, it's very hard to find kind of that all-in-one role, and this is something that Stephen and Tanja were looking at as well. And the one thing that I, have found a lot of kind of success in is looking for somebody who's a bit of an igniter, a bit of a magnet, like somebody who is really good at drawing in kind of your senior level leaders as well as your data stewards into any conversation. Like, forget it's about data, but like they can bring you in and say, hey, I want to talk to you about this, and let's pull you out of your shell. Like, talk to me about something. Like, you need someone like that in the team, because the rest of it maybe isn't that exciting, and you're going to have to get these people to do like sprints with you and work with you, and you need to think about, okay, who's that person who I was excited about, and remember them through kind of that journey, because it's important. It makes a difference. Like, you'll see the difference in the room, and you'll see the attendance difference in terms of people coming to sessions that you host and that kind of thing. So it's sometimes not necessarily the first role you think about here, but it is pretty key and critical in terms of driving this through an enterprise across always competing priorities, right?
Yeah, I heard a couple of key words there. I mean, at the end of the day, we're looking for people with experience, in this field, and it is a bit of a direct call out even to this audience here, saying, we're looking for good people to be these magnets across the organization, because at the end of the day, the platform you're putting out there allows anyone in the organization to find, understand, trust this information. So you're almost the central point for all the company's data at that point. It's pretty cool.
If I
say, yeah, go ahead.
If I may, Ben just touched on something so important, right? And those are just, almost like barely noticeable qualities, right? But they're so important, right? So you actually need you need the core, right? And that's often one person, right? You need energy, right? You need that person to be engaging. You also really need that person to know enough about the product and the whole idea, right? Where we're going. And you need stamina. You need stamina. This is not 1 year project, right? This is and I actually made a note for myself. This connected data word that we coined here. I really love it, because that's where it really starts to happen. That's the magic, right? Magic is not in doing the catalog and adding the business data and relationships to have the beautiful lineage. That's not a magic. That's work, right? Magic is really when you put all that work and you start to see the fruit, right? That connected metadata in the platform for all sorts of use cases and users. It's amazing, right? So that's that person really needs the stamina. They really need to be there for years, right? And when people start falling off because they're tired and they can't take it anymore and doesn't make sense anymore, right? You really need the driver.
Love it.
Can I know we're out of time, and just because I want to chime in as well on what Tanja and Ben said, that kind of evangelist product marketing. So I mentioned product management, but also product marketing. And when we've been looking for people to staff up especially our adoption, it's like product marketing that you really need. And if you don't do that, then you have that thing that's sitting in the dark that nobody's using. So yeah, it's really important.
This is let's not build it and wait for people to come. It's really getting this out there, spreading the joy, and it is a bit of marketing internally and what have you. We are.
And it takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of time. Like don't underestimate the effort these people need to talk to everyone, make rounds, and it's amazing, but it works. Like it pays off.
Yeah, I agree. And one of the trends we're seeing is data analytics coming together. So maybe just touch on what that means in your organizations. Maybe Steve, do you want to touch on that one first?
Sure. So we've kind of rethought how data can be more effective in analytics, and we realized it's not that shocking of a realization that the organizations should be tied together. And so Scotiabank made a change about 1.5 years ago to bring together data and analytics under one leader. And it's a very senior leader within the organization. The benefit of doing that is that now those people who are on the forefront of technology and the use of data, because it's all about the consumers of the data, those are the ones who, if we can enable, we can get the most uplift from enabling them. So always pressure to churn out more and more marketing campaigns sooner and sooner, quicker and quicker. We talk about it taking 90 days. We'd like it to take 20 or 30 days. The more access that those teams have to good data and understanding of the data, the faster they can move, the more agile they can be. So by kind of aligning the goals between data and the data governance side, the more traditional kind of boring data governance side, I agree with Ben that data governance is almost a bad word. We can hook those people up with the analytics people who are very fast moving and maybe less aware of governance, and kind of get that benefit of having that complementary teamwork. And so what we found is when we joined data and analytics together, we were all of a sudden like much better focus on what problems we were trying to solve. We can still get the regulatory problem solved. We can still do the protect the bank, because we care about grow the bank and protect the bank. If you do a really good job of growing the bank, a really good job, and make it repeatable and productionizable, you're also protecting the bank at the same time. It's that like kind of hidden benefit where you get almost free data governance out of that.
Yeah. Ben, comments there?
Yeah, I to be honest, I really like what Steve said. Like, I think that's it's a really and it's a nice kind of, you see the synergy for sure between the groups. You often see anybody whose prime role isn't governance wants to move fast, and governance is seen as a bit of a break, right? And so partnering those groups up is a great opportunity for shared success, right? You build out the catalog, you build out the knowledge, but you also have the group that's still able to move quickly, and that's a really good thing. I was listening to the lead at Samsung, who was presenting earlier, talking about kind of incrementalism versus explosive growth, and talking about how it's not necessarily about doing the same thing or kind of building upon something so much as like really focusing on the connections between things, right? So don't worry about the parts, but worry about the connections, right? And I think that there's a really good message here as well that talks about kind of data and analytics, right? There's a big connection there. And so how do you build that connection to be stronger, right? And to go back to our conversation about people and talent, what are the right people, and how do they make those connections stronger? What is in their scorecard that is about building that relationship and that shared kind of win, so that they focus on that, because the connection is extremely important, and it gives to be honest, it also provides great growth opportunities for people who are in kind of maybe roles that don't necessarily have a huge trajectory for growth, but they work with the data, right? So they have an opportunity to build in and build up kind of that knowledge, and then sharing that across the data and analytics spectrum is incredible to work well. So yeah, I think this is important.
Listen, I'm looking at the time, and we're only probably 4 minutes left. This has been really great. So maybe we'll just go to the last question we had, which was really about getting a bit more tactical. And for the audience here who may be looking at you going, hey, how do we start our own programs? What one piece of advice or wisdom would you like to share with those who are maybe embarking on this similar kind of data journey now? Tanja, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. So, well, one bit of advice. You have to watch everything. Sorry. So basically, yes, don't focus too much on one area and lose sight of others, right? I urge you not to underestimate the cultural change you will have to go through. Like like even the readiest, company will come to a point where we've just done it this way forever, right? So, and often is not conscious at all. It is just daily jobs that are driving these people, right? And don't underestimate, don't ever forget about actually processes, right? How what you do fits with everybody else, and back to connections versus parts, right? So yes, you need to build and enhance your part, right? But like don't forget that there's a process and people, and those connections are vital.
Thank you. Steve.
Okay. I think step back from the tooling and the technology. Think about your processes and the meta model you need to support those processes. And that's a good guide to how you can prioritize the work. And then, the tooling afterwards, sort of thing, right?
Yeah. So come up with your model of how you want it to do, not fit into someone else's model. Come up with your model and then model that to how you want to support your business.
Yeah, and then think about the important processes that you want to improve. Like for example, we've got a big initiative around doing a better job of granting access to data, and we're using our universal catalog to do that. That's a very complex process. It's a big change for the bank. It's a big organizational change. We really thought through that well, even without thinking about now how are we actually going to do this in Collibra. We thought about the meta model before we thought about how we implement it. And I think that gives you that kind of clarity to approach it that way.
Yeah. Ben?
I get to wrap. I'm kidding. I'll give it to you to wrap. My very short piece of advice, and this comes from we like to build our own technology in our organization. Don't forget about technology, right? We've talked a lot about kind of stewardship in the business. Don't forget that data gets created often in the technology, and you need those folks to be stewards as well and to help kind of in that growth.
Thank you. Ben, Tanja, Steve, it's been great to have you on the panel. I've loved the insight, the practical advice. I'm looking through my notes. It's like, okay, universal catalog, data is a team sport, build an enterprise approach, right? There's a lot of things that now we're doing and in the future, AI, ML, model governance, how we look at connected data and just building the team to support that. Hint, hint, please, we're looking for people. And just being evangelists, being that magnet across the organization. Those are some key takeaways I have. I really appreciate your time on this, and thanks to all of you, Steve, Tanja, and Ben, our great data leaders. Thanks to the Big Data AI conference as well, and also to our audience. So I think that on that we'll wrap, and I can certainly say the future looks rosy for these Collibra data programs, also being a customer of yours as well. So thanks again, everyone, and look forward to seeing you in the rest of the conference. Have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.